Picture a city so famous it has been painted, sung about, written into novels that will outlast empires. Now fill it with the worst smell in the civilized world. Add open trenches of human waste running down the middle of every street, a river so thick with filth that the fish have been dying in it for decades, and a sky permanently brown with the smoke of 300,000 cooking fires burning cheap tallow and wet wood. Add bodies. There are always bodies somewhere, dumped in the night, half-eaten by dogs before the morning collectors arrive. That is Paris, the city of light, the most beautiful city in Europe, which is also, simultaneously, the most terrible city in Europe. A place where you can walk past a palace with gilded gates and step directly into a gutter full of things you do not want to identify. A place where aristocrats powder their wigs with scented flour, while 10 streets away people are eating bread made from things that are not entirely wheat. A city where you can die of cold in January, die of plague in August, and die of hunger in any month you like. We are going back there tonight. Not as tourists, not as travellers with guidebooks and the money to stay somewhere clean. We're going back as the people history forgets to mention, not the philosophes in their salons, not the courtiers at Versailles, not even the comfortable merchants on the Rue Saint-Honoré. We are going back as the invisible ones, the ones who carry water, haul firewood, empty cesspits, drag carts, sleep 4 to a mattress in rooms with no windows, the ones who keep Paris running while Paris pretends they don't exist. I make these history stories and I genuinely don't know what half of you are doing with them. Some of you are falling asleep, which is the whole point. Some of you are apparently doing chores. One person told me they listen while running, which is fine, I guess. But you're going to be out there jogging while I describe 18th century sewage, and that's on you. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Turn down the light if you can. Here we go. The thing about poverty, real poverty, the kind that lives in your bones, is that it is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a crash and a flash of lightning. It arrives as a series of small facts. The fact that you are cold right now, and you've been cold for 3 months. The fact that your hands have not been fully warm since October, and it is now February. And February in Paris is a special kind of cruelty. Not the killing cold of December, but a wet, persistent grey cold that seeps through every wall and rests in every joint, and makes you feel that the sun has simply forgotten you exist. The fact that your back hurts. It has hurt since your first week. It will hurt for the rest of your working life, however long that turns out to be. You carry water for a living. 2 buckets suspended from a wooden yoke across your shoulders. 40, 50, 60 litres of Seine water per load. Up 4 flights of stairs. Down again. Back to the fountain. Up again. Your spine has opinions about this arrangement. Your name, for the purposes of tonight, is Etienne. Etienne Poirier, 17 years old. From a village 3 days' walk south of Auxerre, which is already nowhere you've heard of, making your village double nowhere. You arrived in Paris 8 months ago with a letter from your uncle, who knew a man who had once employed a water carrier and might be willing to employ another one. That letter got you this: a space in a garni on the Rue Mouffetard, in the Faubourg Saint-Marcel, which is the poorest neighbourhood in the poorest city in the world. You sleep, and I use the word loosely, on a cornhusk mattress in a room that measures roughly 3 metres by 4 metres and contains, currently, 6 people, yourself. A rope maker from Lyon named Gilles, who is 40 and looks 60, and has a cough that seems to be working toward a conclusion. A pair of brothers from somewhere in Brittany who speak French badly and Breton constantly, and spend their evenings arguing about something you never understand, and a woman named Marguerite who washes laundry for a living and whose hands are so red and raw from the lye that they look like they belong to someone else. Margaret has been here the longest, 11 years on the Rue Mouffetard. She knows everything. She charges you for the information sometimes. A cup of small beer per piece of advice, but she's honest about what she knows and doesn't know, which is more than you can say for most people in Paris. The sixth person in the room is someone new. He arrived 3 days ago and hasn't told anyone his name. He sleeps in the corner near the door and is gone before dawn each morning, which could mean anything from legitimate early morning work to being a police informer to simply being the kind of person who values privacy. In Paris, you learn not to ask. Your eyes open to darkness, not the comfortable darkness of a country night when you could look up and find the stars through a gap in the thatch. This is urban darkness, thick and smothered, pressed down by the weight of 6,000 buildings pressing against each other, by the narrowness of streets so tight that the upper floors practically touch across the gap, by the perpetual haze that settles over Paris like a lid pressed onto a pot. Darkness and smell. There is always the smell first. It comes in layers, and by now you know each one. The top layer is the building itself, damp plaster, mildew eating at the walls behind the crumbling whitewash, the faint sweetness of rot that wood develops when it has been wet for decades and never fully dried out. Below that, the 6 bodies share in this air. Unwashed wool and linen, the particular sour warmth of sleeping people, the acrid edge of the Breton brothers' cheap tobacco, Gilles Spray, which has been deteriorating since December and now carries something in it that has nothing to do with what he ate for dinner. Below that, the building below this one, the courtyard at the bottom, the Rue Mouffetard itself coming up through the floorboards and the window gaps, dung from the horses, rotting cabbage from the market stalls, the sharp chemical bite of urine from the ruisseau, the central gutter channel where everything eventually ends up. And underneath all of it, running through everything like a bass note that never resolves, Paris, the smell of 600,000 people and their animals and their industry and their waste, pressed together in a space that would be too small for half that number, in a city that has no functioning sanitation system and never has. You lie still for a moment and let it all settle over you. Then Gilles coughs, once, twice. The wet, rattling third cough that has been arriving earlier each morning. He turns over. Someone, one of the Bretons, mutters something. Marguerite doesn't move. She sleeps like the dead, efficiently, harvesting every minute available before the laundry arrives. You get up. Your feet find the floor. The boards are cold. They are always cold. This floor has never been warm in the 8 months you have lived here, not even in August, which should have been impossible but turned out not to be. You stand in the dark in your shirt, your one good shirt which you sleep in because there's no point in having it hang up and get colder, and reach for your breeches by feel. The cord is fraying on the left side. You know this without looking. You've been meaning to fix it for 6 weeks. You don't have thread. You have meant to buy thread. You have not bought thread. The end of each day there is never quite enough money for thread, because there was bread, and there was the rent to consider, and Gilles needed a coin for the apothecary's draft, even though the draft doesn't seem to be doing anything, and the garni owner raised the price last month by 2 sous and didn't apologise about it. Thread remains theoretical. You tie the cord. it holds. This is the daily negotiation with your possessions. Each item is failing in some specific way, and each morning you assess how much further it can go. The shirt is wearing thin at the elbows. The shoes, not really shoes, more like wooden soles with leather straps that have been restitched so many times the leather is mostly thread now. The left one is developing a gap near the toe that lets in water on wet days, which means every day. The yoke has a crack in the grain of the wood that you have rubbed with tallow and watched with anxiety for 3 months. If the yoke breaks, you cannot work. If you cannot work, you cannot pay the 2 livres and 4 sous that the garni owner wants every month, and Madame Lefebvre does not carry debts. But the yoke has held, so far. You don't own much else. A tin cup, a knife, a short, cheap one, not for violence, just for cutting bread and prying things that need prying. A wool cap, which is the single most important item you possess, because without it your ears stop working properly in the cold. The letter from your uncle, which is now useless but which you have kept anyway, folded very small, inside the lining of the yoke's crossbar pad. You take the cap from the nail by the door, pull on your coat, if you can call it that. It's closer to a large piece of stiff fabric with sleeves that someone once called a coat, and sold to a rag picker who sold it to another rag picker, who sold it to a stall on the Marché des Innocents, where you bought it for 22 sous and have worn it every day since. You take the yoke, and you go to work. The staircase in Madame Lefebvre's building is a philosophical statement about impermanence. 12 steps from the 4th floor to the 3rd. One of them, the 7th, sags noticeably to the right under pressure. Not enough to fall through, or at least it hasn't fallen through yet, but you distribute your weight carefully when you're carrying loaded buckets, because the consequences of a misjudgment would be severe. The 3rd to the 2nd, solid enough. The railing detached itself from the wall on the landing side last September and has been leaning against the wall at a suggestive angle ever since. Nobody has fixed it. Nobody will fix it. The concept of building maintenance at this level of the Parisian housing market is essentially mythology. The 2nd to the 1st, fine. Old, but fine. The ground floor smells like the courtyard it opens onto. Standing water, accumulated vegetable waste from the neighbours, a pile of something that might be straw or might be something else in the corner nearest the door. The building has a communal midden in the yard, a hole in the ground basically with boards over it. But the boards have been moved at some point, which means the hole is filling at a rate that suggests future structural instability. You step through the door and into the Rue Mouffetard, and Paris hits you in the face. The Rue Mouffetard is a very old street. This matters. It matters because the age of a street in Paris is essentially a record of how long it has been accumulating everything anyone has dropped, dumped, leaked, or failed to clean up. The Mouffetard has been a street since the Romans, and everything that has happened on it for 1,500 years has in some way contributed to the current condition of the ground beneath your feet. History as sediment. History as the thing you're walking through right now, trying not to slip. The ruisseau runs down the centre. Every street in Paris has one. A central gutter, a channel for all liquid waste to drain away, in theory. In practice, the Mouffetard's ruisseau is wide and ambitious in scope, carrying not just rainwater and domestic grey water, but the contents of every chamber pot emptied from every window above it, plus market waste, horse dung, the runoff from the tanneries uphill, and at least 2 unidentified contributors that you have learned to think of as abstract. The morning collection has not yet happened. The corps des boueurs, the men who shovel up the night's accumulation and load it onto carts to carry outside the city walls, don't come until later. So right now, in the February dark at 5 in the morning, the street is in its natural state, exactly as the night left it. You step carefully. You know where the worst patches are. The market is starting to set up. The Mouffetard is one of Paris's great market streets, has been for centuries, and the setup begins before dawn, in the dark, by feel and long habit. Women arranging vegetables by torchlight, a man dragging a table with a screech of wood on cobblestones, the smell of onions, raw and eye-watering, cutting through everything else, the smell of fresh bread from somewhere nearby, from a baker already at work, and this smell is almost unbearable when you're hungry, which you always are in the morning. You've not eaten yet. You won't eat until you've made enough to eat. This is not an unusual situation. This is a Tuesday. The Fontaine de la Reine is your starting point. It is about 300 metres from Madame Lefebvre's building, at a crossroads where the Rue Mouffetard meets a slightly wider street that goes uphill. The fountain is a stone basin fed by a pipe from the Arquet aqueduct, built under Henri IV, or somebody like that, and it provides water for the entire neighbourhood, which means that every morning there is a queue. The queue is already 12 people long when you arrive. This is the arithmetic of your morning. You need to carry enough water to earn enough money to eat and pay rent and manage the endless small costs of being alive. Each load, 2 buckets, the yoke, the stairs, earns you a certain amount depending on the floor. Ground floor, 1 sou. Second floor, 1.5 sous. Third floor, 2 sous. Above that, negotiable and always a fight. 8 loads minimum to eat. 12 loads to eat and contribute to the week's rent. 15 loads to eat, rent, and have anything left over. 15 loads of water means 30 buckets. Means maybe 10. 12 trips from this fountain to the buildings you serve. Means about 7 hours of walking and climbing. If the stairs are kind and the customers aren't difficult. On a good day you manage 16, 17 loads. On a bad day, rain or a frozen fountain, or a difficult customer who claims you spilled half the water before reaching a floor, you manage 10. Today you need 12. The woman ahead of you in the queue is someone you know slightly. Her name is Veronique, and she also carries water from a different fountain further up the hill. She is 23 years old and had been doing this since she was 14. Her shoulders are visibly uneven now. The left one pushed down, the muscles deformed by years of the same asymmetric load. She moves the yoke constantly, shifting it, trying to distribute the weight differently. But there is no comfortable way to carry 60 litres of water up 4 flights of stairs. Your body adapts. It deforms. In 10 years, your shoulders will look like hers. She nods at you. You nod back. Nobody talks much in the queue. It's too early, too cold, too much effort. Breath comes in visible clouds. The stone lip of the fountain basin is slick with frost. You run your thumb along the crack in your yoke and feel that it hasn't opened further in the night. Small mercies. The queue moves. You fill your buckets. The water is cold. That sounds obvious. Of course, a fountain in February is cold. But the specific quality of this cold is worth noting. It is not the gentle cold of a glass of water on a warm day. It is the cold of stone and iron and underground channels that have been carrying water through Paris's subsoil since long before you were born. A cold that does not care about your hands and does not respond to them, and simply takes the heat out of your palms in the time it takes to fill a bucket. By the time both buckets are full, your fingers have gone from cold to numb to a specific aching category of not quite pain that will persist until about noon. You settle the yoke across your shoulders. The weight arrives, 40 kilos approximately, 2 buckets, each about 20 litres. The wood of the yoke itself, the chains and hooks. It lands on your trapezius muscles and the bones beneath them with a casual authority of something that doesn't care whether you're ready or not. You lean forward slightly, the correct posture, the thing you learned in the first week, not from anyone teaching you, but from your body's urgent negotiations with gravity, and you start walking. Your first building is on the Rue du Pot de Fer, 4 stories, 3 customers, a seamstress on the 2nd floor, a printer's family on the 3rd, and a widow on the 4th named Madame Couturier, who is 70 years old and cannot carry water herself, and for whom you have a complicated feeling that sits somewhere between pity and professional respect. Madame Couturier lives alone. Her daughter is somewhere. You've heard different versions, none of them cheerful. She has very little money. She pays you in small coins that she counts carefully into your palm, and sometimes she gives you a piece of bread if she has extra, which she doesn't always, which means you take the bread when it's offered and don't think about whether she can afford it. The seamstress on the 2nd floor is easy. 2nd floors always are. 8 steps up, water delivered, coin received, back down. The printer's family is harder. 3rd floor, 22 steps, and the printer himself has the habit of examining your bucket suspiciously before accepting it, as though you might have drunk some of it on the way up. You have considered this option. You have not taken it. The water from the Seine, even filtered through stone at the fountain, is not water you would choose to drink if you had alternatives. You don't always have alternatives. The 4th floor, 31 stairs. You have counted them enough times that they have a rhythm, a sound, a specific pattern of creaks. The 7th stair is silent. The 12th makes a sound like something snapping but hasn't snapped in 8 months. The 22nd is low enough that the yoke clips the ceiling if you don't duck, and you've learned this through your skull repeatedly in the early weeks. You duck, automatically, without thinking. By the time you reach Madame Couturier's landing, your thighs are burning, your lower back has filed its daily objection, and the buckets are swinging slightly from the motion of your climb, which means some water has sloshed up and over the rim and down your wrist and under your sleeve, and that thin stripe of February water against your skin is its own special announcement of the day's intentions. You knock, wait. She takes a moment. She always takes a moment. Come in. The room is small and dark and cold. Colder than the street, which shouldn't be possible but is, because Madame Couturier cannot afford enough wood to keep the hearth above the temperature of slow attrition. A single candle, a table with a chair, a bed in the corner that she is just rising from, moving slowly, her face the face of someone who has decided each morning to continue and has not yet regretted it. You pour the water into her storage vessel, a large earthenware jar half cracked and sealed with a wrap of oiled cloth, and she counts your coins, 1.5 sous for the 4th floor. The fountain was busy this morning, she says. Not a question, just conversation. Yes, madame. Veronique's girl was there. Veronique herself. She should be married. She says this every time. It is not advice so much as a general philosophical position on the correct arrangement of the world. All this carrying, it's not right for a woman. You say nothing. You take the coins, you pick up the empty buckets. "There is bread," she says, and your stomach says something involuntary before you can stop it. She's already moving toward the table, a small loaf, the size of your fist. She breaks it in half and holds out the smaller half. The bread is stale. You eat it on the stairs going down. It is the best thing that will happen to you before noon. By 8 in the morning you have made 6 trips. 6 trips means you have climbed approximately 400 stairs, carrying 40 kilos per trip, walking roughly 3 kilometers between fountain and buildings. Your shoulders have stopped reporting pain and moved into a different mode, a dull, constant hum that lives at the base of your neck and reaches forward to your collarbones. Your shoes are wet through. The gap in the left one has been letting in a thin stream of cold water since the second trip, and your left foot has gone through numb and out the other side into something that is not quite feeling, but is not feeling either. You stand at the fountain for the 7th fill and press your palms flat against the stone basin for a moment. The stone is cold. Your palms are cold. For a second they're exactly the same temperature, neither thing warming the other, a kind of equilibrium. You fill the buckets. Paris is fully awake now, and Paris fully awake is an assault on every sense simultaneously. You have been in this city 8 months, and you are still, sometimes stopped by the sheer overwhelming fact of it. The noise alone. In your village outside Auxerre, the loudest thing was the church bell on Sunday morning, and it rang 6 times and then stopped, and the silence after it was deep and present. Paris has no silences. Paris has layers of noise that start before dawn and do not stop until sometime around 3 in the morning, and then resume again before you've had a chance to notice the gap. Right now, at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday in February, the market vendors on the Mouffetard, competing for attention with escalating volume, navets frais, les plus beaux navets de Paris, turnips, always turnips in February, the eternal winter vegetable, endlessly available, endlessly grey. A man selling herrings from a basket balanced on his head, the smell arriving several meters before the man. A woman with a portable oven strapped to her back selling chestnuts, chaud, tout chaud, hot chestnuts, and the smoke from her oven trailing behind her like a small personal weather system. The wheels. Every surface in Paris is cobblestone, and every vehicle has iron-rimmed wheels, and iron on cobblestone produces a sound that is not quite music and not quite pain, but lives in the territory between them. Carts hauling firewood, carts hauling building materials, carts hauling the night soil collected this morning from the cesspits that underlie every courtyard in the city. You can smell those carts before you see them, and you've learned to press yourself against a wall and breathe through your mouth when they pass. The horses, hundreds of them in any given hour, and horses produce waste at a rate that the Parisian street system was never designed to manage. A working horse deposits roughly 15 kilograms of dung per day. Paris has, at any given time, somewhere between 30 and 40,000 horses. You can do that arithmetic if you want, but the short version is, the streets are never clean, and the people paid to clean them are always behind. The people. So many people. Your village had 300 souls. The Faubourg Saint-Marcel alone has more people than that per street, and it's one of dozens of faubourgs, and they all flow into the centre, into the tangle of medieval streets inside the old walls, where the buildings are so tall and the streets so narrow that at noon the sun only reaches the ground for about 20 minutes. You have learned to navigate it. You shoulder your yoke and you move, and the crowd parts for you because you are carrying 40 kilos of water, and you are walking with the momentum of someone who cannot easily stop. And even in Paris, even in the absolute chaos of the Mouffetard at market time, people understand and step aside for someone with a full yoke. It is almost the only time you feel powerful. Your 7th customer of the morning is new. He is on the 3rd floor of a building on the Rue des Fossés Saint-Marcel, and his name, his concierge informs you on your way up, is Monsieur Delacour, and he is a schoolmaster, and he has just arrived from Dijon, and he has a very particular view on the quality of water acceptable for his household. You learn this as you climb. The concierge, a stout woman with a mole on her chin that seems to be acquiring ambition, delivers this information as a warning. He sent back the last carrier's water, said it was turbid, made him show the bucket in the light. The water is always turbid. The Seine is a magnificent river in the sense that it is large and flows through the most famous city in Europe, but in the sense of being clean, potable, or in any way appropriate for human consumption, the Seine is a different matter. By the time water from the Seine reaches the fountain on the Rue Mouffetard, it has passed through the outflow of approximately 12 dye works, 6 tanneries, the washerwomen's dock, 3 mill wheels, and whatever the city has dumped in it overnight, which is considerable. There are people in Paris who sell water from specific springs or specific sources, claiming it's cleaner. There are people in Paris who will sell you anything. You deliver your water to Monsieur Delacour. He holds the bucket up to his single window. He's a thin man, pale in the way of someone who spends his days indoors by choice, with spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and the expression of someone who's been disappointed before and expects to be disappointed again. He looks at the water. You look at him looking at the water. "It's cloudy," he says. "Yes, monsieur." "I can see sediment." "Yes, monsieur." "This is what I'm supposed to cook with? Bathe with?" You think several things in quick succession. You think, nobody in the Faubourg Saint-Marcel bathes with anything. You think, the water in every apartment in this building is exactly as cloudy as what you're holding. You think, Dijon is not Paris, and Paris is not a place that cares about your expectations. You say, "It's the best available from the Fontaine de la Reine, monsieur. If you'd like the spring water carriers, they come through on Thursdays, but they charge..." Thursday? He says the word as if it's a personal insult. "I need water today." "Yes, monsieur." A pause. He lowers the bucket. "Fine." He counts out the coins. He counts them slowly. 3rd floor, 2 sous, and he counts out 1 sou and 15 deniers, which is 1. Denier short and looks at you with an expression that dares you to say something. You're 17 years old. He's a schoolmaster from Dijon who is probably 40 and has money and connections and a room to himself. You say nothing. You take the coins. You pick up your empty buckets. And on the stairs going down, alone, in the dark between the 2nd and 1st floor, you open your fist and look at the coins and feel something that is not quite anger and not quite humiliation, but lives in the neighbourhood of both, and you close your fist again and you keep walking. 1 denier. That's what your silence was worth. In Paris, silence is always a transaction. There is a specific quality to the cold in a poor neighbourhood that is different from cold in general. You know cold in the countryside, your village in winter, the clean cold of frozen fields, The sharp-edged cold of early mornings when everything was covered in white frost and the sky was clear blue and the cold hurt, but it was simple, honest, single-ingredient cold. That cold was a weather condition. The cold of the Faubourg Saint-Marcel is a condition of life. It lives in the buildings, which were not built to be warm, built fast, built cheap, built with whatever materials cost least, with walls that are one course of stone where two would be needed and plaster over that to make it look like more. The plaster cracks. The cold comes through. The fires in the hearths are small because wood cost money, because charcoal cost money, because everything costs money and nobody in this building has enough of it. Between your 7th and 8th loads, you stop at the corner where a brazier burns. Someone has set it up, a man you don't know, feeding it scraps of wood and charging a liard for the use of it. The heat from the brazier is extravagant by Rue Mouffetard standards. A full circle of warmth, maybe 2 meters in diameter, and 3 or 4 people standing in it, holding their hands out, not talking, just absorbing. You stand in it for 2 minutes, maybe 3. Your left foot begins to feel again, which turns out to be painful, the feeling returning through pins and a deep ache. You shift your weight. The tallow in the crack of your yoke has gone hard from the cold. You press your thumb against it to soften it slightly, watching the crack, still holding. A boy, maybe 12, pushes into the circle. He has no shoes. He has instead rags wrapped around his feet and tied with string, and they are wet, and his face has the specific blank expression that appears when a body is experiencing cold, that it has stopped bothering to process as an emergency, because the emergency has been continuous for too long. You look at him. He looks at the fire. You move slightly to the right to give him a better angle. He takes it without acknowledgement. He is 12 and barefoot in February in Paris, and there is nothing to say about this that isn't either obvious or inadequate. The man with the brazier holds out his hand. The boy turns out his pockets, empty. He shrugs with his whole body, a gesture of absolute experienced poverty, the shrug of someone for whom empty pockets is not a surprise but a condition. The man hesitates. For a moment, one moment, the man looks at the boy's feet. Then he points away from the brazier. The boy moves, doesn't argue, doesn't even change his expression. He moves away, back into the cold, and you watch him go and you think about your one denier that you didn't argue about with the schoolmaster from Dijon. And you think about the 12-year-old's bare feet, and you don't know what to do with any of it. You pick up your yoke. 8 more trips. You go. The cimetière des innocents is not something you sought out. It found you, the way Paris finds you with things you weren't looking for, by being inescapable, by being there around every other corner, by being so woven into the city's daily life that after a while you stop noticing it, and then, one day, you notice it again, and you feel strange that you ever stopped. The Cemetery of the Innocents is the oldest, largest, and most famous burying ground in Paris. It is in the heart of the city, near Les Halles, the great market, right in the middle of everything, and it has been in active use since the 12th century, maybe longer. Nobody is sure anymore. In those 600 plus years, it has received approximately 2 million bodies. 2 million. That number is not metaphorical. Historians will eventually count the bones when they finally move them, and they will reach approximately 2 million human beings compressed into an area roughly 1 city block in size. Right now, in the 1740s, the cemetery is actively, aggressively, catastrophically full. The graves are so packed that new bodies cannot go in without pushing against the ones below. The priests know this. The city knows this. Everyone knows this. And yet the bodies keep coming, because where else do they go? You need somewhere to put the dead, and the innocence is where you put the dead, and so the soil has risen and risen and risen until the ground level inside the cemetery walls is now somewhere between 1 and 3 meters higher than the street outside. The bodies are literally pressing upward through the earth. The charnel houses that line the walls have been stacked so many times with human bones that they have become essentially architectural elements. Walls made of skulls and femurs, the dead serving as load-bearing material for the structures of the living. You pass the innocents on your way between your second and third fountain today. You have a route. There are a few fountains that are accessible to water carriers in the Faubourg Saint-Marcel and the adjacent Quartier Latin, and you move between them depending on which ones have the shortest queues, which ones have been frozen, which ones the neighbourhood women have claimed as essentially their own, and will defend with a particular kind of quiet ferocity. Today the Fontaine de la Reine was slow, so you go to the Fontaine des Innocents. The fountain is new. Built in the 1540s, which in Paris counts as recent, it is a beautifully carved stone structure in the Renaissance style, the faces of nymphs and river gods looking down at you from the top, water flowing from their mouths or their hands or from vessels they hold. It is genuinely beautiful. The craftsmanship is superb. Jean Goujon made the reliefs, a sculptor whose name, if you knew it, you would know as extraordinary. You don't know his name. You know the fountain is prettier than the other ones, and the basin is wider, which means more people can fill buckets simultaneously, which reduces your waiting time. Around it, the neighbourhood goes about its business. Fishwives setting up their stalls for the market at Les Halles, which is enormous. The central market of Paris, sprawling over a huge area, the place where everything edible in the city eventually ends up. The smell of fish, of course, always fish near Les Halles, of blood from the butchers, of old vegetables fermenting at the edges of the stalls, the sweet sharp smell of apples, which someone is selling from a cart 20 meters away, and the apples look good. Genuinely good, red and firm, probably from Normandy, and you are aware of wanting one with an intensity that is slightly embarrassing. And behind all of this, behind the market noise and the fountain splash and the smell of fish, the cemetery. You can't see it from here, it's behind a wall, behind the covered charnel houses, but you can sense it. 6 centuries of death behind a stone wall in the middle of the city. In summer, the smell is something that people have written about at length, and none of the descriptions are adequate. In February, the cold keeps it down, muffled, but it's there. A sweetness underneath everything. Not quite sweet, not quite rot. Something between the two. The specific chemistry of 2 million bodies at various stages of returning to the earth. The city adjusts to it. The market operates 10 meters from this wall. Children play near it. Vendors set up their stalls against it. Because a wall is a wall, and a market is a market, and you use what space you have. You fill your buckets. The fountain water splashes over your wrists again. You lean forward, take the weight, and walk. Behind you, the innocence presses its dead toward the sky. It is 11 o'clock, and you have made 10 trips, and you have not eaten since Madame Couturier's half-bread at 7 this morning, and your body has been keeping track. Hunger in poverty is not the hunger of missing a meal. It is not the inconvenient hollow feeling of being late to lunch. It is something more constant than that, more structural, a background condition like the cold that modulates everything else. It affects how fast you think. It affects your mood, which is not a mood exactly so much as a steady pressure behind your eyes and a shortness in your patience, and a way that everything is slightly more effortful than it would be if you had eaten properly. You have not eaten properly in 8 months. Probably longer, actually. The last year in your village was a bad one. The harvest thin, the winter long. The Paris bread situation is its own form of theatre. There are bakers on almost every street in Paris, nearly 1,000 bakeries in the city by the count of whoever does such counting. Bread is not hard to find. Bread is the most available food in the city. The problem with bread in Paris is not its existence but its price, which is not stable, and its quality, which is not consistent, and the relationship between these two variables, which is complicated and political, and ultimately not in your favour. The price of bread is regulated. The King's Police, the Lieutenant General of Police, which is an office of remarkable scope and ambition, sets the price of bread based on the price of grain, and bakers must sell at the fixed price. This is how it is supposed to work. This is the theory. The practice is that grain prices are volatile, that harvests are unreliable, that distribution of grain through France's road network is slow and uncertain, and that in bad years, and there have been several bad years recently, the harvest of 1740 being especially disastrous, the regulated price of bread goes up and up and up, and the bread that it buys gets smaller and darker, and made from an increasingly theoretical definition of what constitutes wheat. Right now, in February of 1743, a £4 loaf of the cheapest bread available, pain biz, dark bread, the bread for people who cannot afford better, costs 8 sous. You earn between 12 and 16 sous on a good working day. You need 8 sous minimum for bread alone. The remaining 4 to 8 sous have to cover rent, divided by days, about 4 sous per day toward the monthly 2 livres. Fuel if you can afford it. Tools, the yoke needs maintenance. Clothing, the cord on your breeches, the shoe, the thread that remains theoretical, and everything else that life requires. The arithmetic of poverty is not complicated. It is straightforward. The numbers are just very small and they do not add up to enough. You go to the baker on the Rue Mouffetard. His name is Vautrel, and he is a large flowery man with a permanent expression of mild suspicion and forearms that suggest a life of heavy work. His bread is not the best in Paris. It is not close to the best in Paris, but it is nearby, and nearby matters when you are tired and hungry, and your left foot is wet. The shop is warm. You feel this the moment you push through the door, a specific warmth, deep and yeasty and brown, the warmth of ovens that have been burning since 3 in the morning, radiating through the walls and the counter and the stacked loaves. For a second, just a second, you stand in it and do nothing but feel it. Vautrel is behind the counter. He is serving a woman you don't know, better dressed than you, a merchant's wife perhaps, buying a white loaf, white bread, pain blanc, made from fine-sifted wheat flour, light and soft and rising high in the oven. It costs 3 times what your bread costs. It is for people who can afford it. You wait your turn. The woman takes her white bread and leaves. You smell it as she passes. The warm, faint sweetness of good wheat and good baking, the smell that means abundance and comfort and Sunday mornings when things are going well. It is a real smell. It is 3 centimetres from your face. You step up to the counter. Pain bis, you say. The £4. 8 sous. You count out 8 sous. They're there. You have them. The morning's work has added up, just barely. Just enough for this. Vautrelle wraps the loaf in a cloth, slides it across. He does not look at you with hostility. He does not look at you with warmth. He looks at you with the professional blankness of a man who has served hundreds of people and will serve hundreds more, and has nothing in particular to communicate about any of them. You put the loaf under your arm, against your side, where it immediately begins its work of warming that quadrant of your body. You stand outside on the Rue Mouffetard for a moment. You tear a piece from the end. The crust resists. This is not fine bread. It has been made with adulteration. Brin, remixed in, possibly other things, and the crust is hard in a way that has nothing to do with the pleasant crackle of a good Parisian boule. The inside is darker than it should be, dense, slightly gummy. You eat it anyway. You eat it standing in the street in February with your yoke propped against the wall beside you and your wet foot beginning to ache again as the feeling comes back. And the bread is not good, but it is food and it is warm from the oven, and right now those two things are more than enough. You eat half the loaf in the street. You save the other half for later, tucking it inside your coat against your chest, where it will keep warm and where, more importantly, it cannot be stolen, because Paris is full of people who are also hungry and who have made different decisions than you about what they are willing to do about it. There is a Paris that tourists see. The philosophers have begun calling it that. Tourists. Visitors who come to look at the city rather than live in it, who take lodgings in the better quarters and walk up to see the Luxembourg Gardens and the Tuileries and the newly renovated parts of the Louvre, and come away with an impression of grandeur, of a city rising towards some elegant idea of itself. That Paris exists. It is real. You have seen it. But there is another Paris. Not underneath the first one exactly, more like interpenetrating it, the same streets and buildings and air, but a different experience of all of them, that the tourists don't see, that the residents of the Rue Saint-Honoré don't see, that the king doesn't see, that nobody sees unless they are down in it, moving through it with a heavy yoke and cold hands. This is the Paris of the porteurs d'eau, the water carriers, and the crocheteurs, the porters who haul goods on their backs, and the forts de la halle, the strong men of les halles who carry impossible loads for wages that are just enough to keep them working, and the mâcheurs, the rag pickers who go through the city's refuse finding anything that can be sold, and the vidangeurs who empty the cesspits at night, who descend into the underground chambers beneath the city's courtyard floors with shovels and buckets, who carry out what Paris has decided it no longer wants, who are paid relatively well for this service because it is a service that nobody else will perform, who go home at dawn smelling of things that no amount of washing entirely removes. These are the people who keep Paris alive. Without water carriers, the apartments above the ground floor have no water. The upper floors of Paris, where the middle classes live, where the comfortable people live, are made possible by the people below them carrying buckets up the stairs. Without crocheteurs, nothing moves. The streets are impassable to wheeled vehicles for most of their length. Getting goods from one part of the city to another often requires a human back. Without the night workers, the city drowns in its own waste. Paris could not exist without these people. It does not officially notice them. You have learned the rules of this invisibility. You know which streets to take and which to avoid. You know that when you pass a carriage, a proper private carriage, with a coachman and livery, You move to the wall, press yourself in, give the horses the road, because the horses and their passengers matter, and you do not, and the coachman will not divert his animals for a water carrier. You know that when you are on the stairs of a good building, a building where the upper floors have wealthy tenants, where the concierge has standards, you go quickly, you don't linger, you complete the transaction and leave. Your presence in these spaces is tolerated because it is necessary. It is not welcome. You know that certain people will not look at you, will look through you, around you, as though you are a piece of the street furniture. Necessary, present, but not requiring acknowledgement. You used to find this difficult. You thought it was rudeness. You understand now that it is not rudeness exactly. It is something more systematic than that. It is a way of arranging the world that makes sense if you are not the one being arranged. There is a Latin Quarter student, maybe your age, who you pass most mornings near the fountain. He is carrying books. He is going to lectures at the Sorbonne. He looks at you sometimes, directly, not through you, and nods. You nod back. This exchange means nothing, and costs nothing, and makes the morning about 3% more bearable, and you have thought about why that is, and the answer, as far as you can tell, is simply being seen. Being seen is not nothing. Your 12th load of the day is to a building on the Rue des Bernardins, 4th floor, which gives you enough for today's bread and today's share of rent with something left, a small something, maybe 5 or 6 sous, to put toward the cord for your breeches, which you have renamed in your head from theoretical to imminent necessity, after the cord made an ominous stretching sound this morning. The building on the Rue des Bernardins is inhabited at the 4th floor by a man named Monsieur Aubert, who makes his living copying legal documents, who is therefore at home all day sitting at a desk writing, who is deeply interested in the political situation and has views about grain prices that he is happy to share while you're pouring water into his storage vessel. The Parlements, he says, not looking up from the document he's marking, have petitioned again. They won't let it rest. You pour carefully. The storage vessel is a barrel on a wooden stand, and if you pour too fast, the water splashes up and onto the floor, and Monsieur Aubert dislikes this. The price of grain, he continues. It's the speculators. Everyone knows it. Grain merchants buying up the harvest before it comes in, holding it until the prices peak, then selling it. That's why the bread is expensive. That's why there was trouble in Rouen last year. You know about Rouen last year, not from newspapers. You can't afford newspapers, and even if you could, reading is a skill you have in only the most functional sense, but from people, from Marguerite, from Veronique, from the kind of word of mouth that runs through a neighbourhood faster than any printed sheet. People in Rouen had gone to the markets and found the grain prices had doubled. They'd gone to the tax offices and found no help. They'd gone to the grain stores and found them locked and guarded, and then they had stopped going to offices and started going directly to the grain. That is not quite what happened in Rouen, but it's the version that circulates on the Rue Mouffetard. And the version that circulates on the Rue Mouffetard matters more to you than the version in the gazettes. 2 sous a pound for bread, says Monsieur Aubert, still not looking up. When I was a student, it was 1.5. That's 30% in 15 years, and wages haven't moved. You understand what that means? I understand, you say. He does look up then, as though surprised that you answered. Of course you do, he says. You buy bread. He counts out your 2 sous. Keep your head down, he adds, not unkindly. There's talk of trouble. You take the stairs back down. There's always talk of trouble on the Rue Mouffetard, but Monsieur Aubert reads the parliamentary reports, and something in his voice makes you put the words in a different part of your attention than you usually do. The Seine in February is the colour of pewter, which is to say grey-green and cold, and moving with a deliberate, indifferent power. It is about 200 metres wide here, at the point where the Water Carriers Guild has its public washing area near the Petit Pont, and it is full. The winter rains and some snow melt from upriver have it running high against the bridge piers and the quay walls, and the current is quick and muscular and does not care about anything it happens to be passing through. You come to the river because your fountain on the Rue des Fossés needs maintenance, apparently. Someone announced this morning that the pipe has been blocked and the city's masons have been called for, which could mean it reopens tomorrow or in 3 weeks, depending on how the city feels about it. So you make the walk to the river fountains near the quays, which are fed directly from a pumping mechanism at the Pont Notre Dame, which is some engineering structure or wheel you've never fully understood, but which produces water that comes through a pipe and comes out a spout and is what it is. The walk to the quays gives you more of the city. Here, in the area between the Faubourg Saint-Marcel and the Ile de la Cité, the character changes. The streets are still narrow, still dirty, still cobbled with the same irregular stones that have been torturing the shins of Paris since someone laid them 500 years ago. But the buildings are slightly better maintained. There are more signs above doors. Legal offices, notaries, a chandler, a locksmith, 3 bookshops in a row, which seems excessive, but this is the Latin Quarter, and bookshops are apparently what the Latin Quarter grows. Near the river it changes again. The quays are Paris's open back door, where goods arrive from upriver and downriver, and are unloaded and sorted and carried into the city's belly. This morning, a flat-bottomed barge unloading firewood, the logs being passed hand to hand up a chain of workers to the quay wall. A rhythmic, mechanical process that looks like it has been operating continuously since before anyone now working it was born. Another barge with what appears to be wine, barrels being rolled carefully off a ramp, a man catching each one, guiding it by touch to a stable rest against the quay wall. And downstream, a boat carrying something covered in canvas that could be any number of things, and is probably grain because it's grain season, which is to say it's the season when the old grain is running out and the new grain hasn't come yet, and everyone in Paris is watching the grain stores the way a sick person watches the horizon for a doctor. You fill your buckets from the river pump. The pump is a large wooden structure mounted on a platform near the bridge, operated by a wheel turned by the current, turning gears, driving rods, lifting water. It is genuinely impressive as engineering. It is also, due to the position of its intake pipe relative to several upstream outflows that you would rather not specify, producing water of an indeterminate quality that you're trying not to think too hard about. You fill the buckets, you lift the yoke, you begin the walk back. On the way back you pass Notre Dame. You have passed it before. You pass it regularly. It is on a route you take at least twice a week. You've had 8 months of passing it, of absorbing it into your working geography as a landmark, a navigation point, a thing that tells you where you are. And yet, you stop for a moment. You can't always stop. Time and loads and the weight of water all argue against stopping. But today your schedule allows a minute, and you stop. Notre Dame de Paris. It has been here for 500 and some years. Not quite finished yet technically. There are always repairs, Always something being added or reinforced or rebuilt after fire or weather, or the sheer weight of 5 centuries pressing on the original structure. But substantially, essentially, recognisably, 500 years. The towers rise 2/3 of the way up and stop. They were meant to have spires. The original plan called for spires, but the spires were never built, and so the towers stand flat-topped against the February sky with a slightly unfinished quality that somehow makes them look more massive, not less. All that stone going up and stopping like they decided halfway through that height alone was statement enough. The rose window faces west. 3 of them, actually, but the west one catches the morning light in a way that the others don't, and you have timed your passes poorly for seeing it properly. But once, in October, you came past at exactly the right angle and the right moment, and the light was coming through it in a way that you haven't been able to adequately describe to yourself since. The gargoyles watched the city. They have watched the city for 3 centuries, these particular ones. Grotesque stone faces, stone wings, stone beaks and claws, projecting from the gallery above the nave, looking down at the Seine, and the streets, and the people moving through them with expressions of stone-faced neutrality. They have watched plague. They have watched fire, though miraculously never the fire that brought down the cathedral. They have watched the processions of kings and the processions of the condemned and the processions of the ordinary. The daily movement of a city that has been continuously occupied for longer than memory reaches. Right now they are watching you. Etienne Poirier, water carrier, age 17, from nowhere you've heard of, standing on the Quai de la Tournelle with 40 kilos of river water on his shoulders, looking up at a building that has been here 4 times longer than anyone who could possibly be looking at it. You're very small. The city is very large. This is not a distressing thought exactly. It is simply true. You adjust the yoke. You keep walking. There is a courtyard you pass most days that you've begun to think of as a thermometer for the neighbourhood's condition. It's on the Rue du Mûrier, a short street off the Mouffetard, set back from the road behind a low arch that you have to duck through. The courtyard itself is not large, perhaps 15 metres square, surrounded on 3 sides by the backs and sides of buildings. There's a well in the centre, though the well has been contaminated since before you arrived and nobody uses it, which is why water carriers have customers in these buildings at all. What the courtyard contains changes with the season and the week and the broader situation of the city. In good weeks, children playing, a woman hanging laundry, a man repairing something, the general activity of people managing their lives. In bad weeks, more people standing around, more bundles against walls, more of the specific quality of congregation that means not by choice, that means people who have nowhere else to be. Today, when you cut through the courtyard on your way between deliveries, there are 7 people standing in it who weren't there yesterday. Women, mostly, some children. One old man sitting against the wall with his knees up and his head down, not moving. One of the women, a girl really, maybe 15, is holding a baby and looking at the well. She knows the well doesn't work, she's looking at it anyway. Sometimes you look at things that can't help you, because you've run out of things to look at that can. Marguerite is there too, on her way somewhere with a bundle of washing. She stops when she sees the new faces. Expelled, she says, to nobody in particular. The girl with the baby turns. The landowner sold the building. New tenant takes it at the end of the month. All of you? All the 3rd floor. Marguerite looks at them. She looks at the well. She looks at the buildings around the courtyard, which are also, visibly, full. The kind of full where extra people in a building creates a visible difference, an overflow, a pressure. There's a garni on the Rue du Faubourg, she says. Widow named Bard. It's not good, but she'll take families. How much? Marguerite tells her the price. The girl's face does something that isn't quite a reaction, isn't quite anything expressible. It's the face of someone doing arithmetic and not liking the result, but not being surprised by it either. Surprise requires the belief that things could have been otherwise. You keep moving. You finish the day at 4 p.m. 14 loads. You count it twice to make sure. 14 loads, which is better than you needed it to be, which means something goes into the small savings. The cloth that Marguerite lets you keep tied inside the lining of your coat where it cannot be stolen. 11 sous today. Total, after bread, 11 sous. You buy thread. It costs 1 sou for a small spool, purchased from a notion stall near the Mouffetard market, where a woman sits all day among bobbins and needles and buttons and the small infrastructure of clothing maintenance. 1 sou. You hold the spool in your hand for a moment. It's light, lighter than water, lighter than almost anything, and it has been theoretical for 6 weeks, and now it is real. You go back to the garni. The room has that end-of-day atmosphere. Gilles already in bed, the cough running its afternoon programme, the Breton brothers not yet returned. Marguerite sitting by the single window. The window faces a wall, which means it admits light for approximately 40 minutes per day, and it is past those 40 minutes now. Sewing by feel in the diminishing light. You sit on the edge of the mattress and thread the needle and begin to fix the cord on your breeches. Your hands are tired. The specific tired of hands that have worked all day in cold water and cold air, the fingertips raw and slightly cracked at the knuckle joints, the palms roughened in a way that still surprises you when you look at them. Not your hands as you thought of them before Paris, but different hands, working hands, hands shaped by the work they've been doing. The thread is fiddly. You lose it twice before you get it through the needle. But then it's through, and the cord is fixed, and the fix is sturdy, and you feel a satisfaction that is probably out of proportion to the achievement, but is real nonetheless. Small things done well. Marguerite glances over. About time, she says. 3 weeks after Monsieur Aubert's warning, the trouble comes. Not from where you expected. Not from the Faubourg Saint-Marcel specifically, though the Faubourg is ready, has been ready for months in the way that a place where people are hungry and cold and watching the bread price climb is always in some sense ready. It comes from Les Halles. It starts, as far as you can reconstruct it later, from the pieces of information that flow back through the neighbourhood like water through a system of drainage channels, with a grain shipment. A barge arrived on the river 2 days ago with a cargo of grain. Everyone knew about it. In a city watching its grain supply the way Paris watches it, the arrival of a barge is news within the hour. The barge docked at the Quai des Grands Augustins, unloaded. The grain went where? Into which warehouse? Under whose control? At what price would it be sold? These questions spread through the city. The answers were not good. The grain had been bought before it arrived, purchased on the river somewhere upstream by an agent of a grain merchant named, in the version circulating on the Rue Mouffetard, as Monsieur Quelque Chose, Monsieur Somebody, because nobody's entirely sure of the name, but everyone is sure of the type. Purchased ahead of market, going into a warehouse to wait for the price to peak further. Meanwhile, the bakers were buying at the higher price, which meant the bread price went up again. which meant this morning, this specific morning, a £4 loaf of pain bis cost not 8 sous, but 9. 1 sou more. 1 sou is nothing if you have many sous. 1 sou is significant if you have few. 1 sou to someone making 12 sous on a good day and spending 8 on bread and 4 on rent is the sou that tips the arithmetic. You hear the noise before you see it. You are on the Rue de la Ferronnerie, heading toward the market at Les Halles with your empty buckets. There's a customer on the Rue Saint-Denis who needs water, and there's a fountain near Les Halles that's been less crowded lately since a competing carrier changed his route. You hear it a block away, not the normal noise of Les Halles, which is loud and constant and omnidirectional, but a different noise, a more concentrated noise, a noise with direction and purpose. You come around the corner and stop. The market is not quite a riot, not yet. But it is something. A crowd, dense and vocal, pressed up against the stalls of several grain merchants. The stalls where bread is sold and where the price is written on a board. The boards have been updated this morning. The crowd is reading the boards. The crowd has opinions about the boards. There are women at the front of it, which is not surprising. Women in Paris do most of the food purchasing because men are working, which means women encounter the price of bread directly and personally every single day in a way that men who are told about the price of bread second-hand do not. Women have been at the front of every food riot in France for as long as there have been food riots in France, which is a long time. One woman in particular, she's maybe 35, with red hands from some kind of work and a voice that has the carrying quality of someone who has spent years being louder than the noise around her, is standing on the lip of the grain merchant's raised stall and addressing the crowd with the directness of someone who has thought about this for a long time and has finally decided that the thinking has gone on long enough. 9 sous, she is saying. 9 sous for a £4 loaf. Last month it was 8. The month before, 7.5. Who told them they could do this? The crowd responds in the way crowds respond when someone is saying what they already thought. The police fixed the price, someone yells, so raise the price complaint with the police. The police fixed it at 9 sous. Then the police work for the grain merchants. You should not be standing here. Standing in a crowd that is developing this kind of velocity is a decision with consequences, and the consequences are not limited to getting where you need to go an hour late. The Lieutenant General of Police, whose officers are Paris's law enforcement, and who take a dim view of public disorder, has men near Les Halles at all times, and public disorder has historically resulted in arrests, and arrests result in imprisonment in the Châtelet or the Bicêtre, and the Châtelet and the Bicêtre are not places from which a 17-year-old water carrier from nowhere emerges easily or quickly. You know this. Marguerite told you this in your first month, in a tone that suggested it was too important to be advice and was instead simply fact. And yet, you don't move, because the woman on the stall is right. You know she's right. You buy bread every day. You have watched the price go up the way Monsieur Aubert described. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, just steadily, relentlessly, one increment at a time, the way a building wall develops cracks, slowly and then all at once. You watch. The grain merchant, who has been standing inside his stall watching this develop with an expression that has gone from confident to less confident over the last several minutes, says something to his assistant. The assistant leaves through the back of the stall quickly, going for the police watch almost certainly. The woman on the stall notices him leave. going for the guard," she announces to the crowd. "What will the guard do? Will the guard feed our children? Will the guard lower the price of grain?" The crowd's noise changes pitch. You feel it happen. The crowd's collective mood is a physical thing when you're inside it, like temperature or air pressure, and what was frustration with a sharp edge has become something more muscular, more directed. The first moment of actual action happens not violently, but with a kind of practical determination. A woman at the front of the crowd reaches past the stall's barrier and takes a loaf of bread from the display. She holds it up. The market holds its breath. Then she puts 8 sous on the counter. Exactly 8 sous. Last month's price. "That's what it's worth," she says. "That's what we're paying." The bread merchant is young. You notice this suddenly. He can't be more than 22. Probably inherited the stall. Probably has no good choices available to him right now. And he looks at the 8 sous, and he looks at the woman, and he looks at the crowd behind her. He doesn't pick up the 8 sous, but he doesn't call it theft either. And in that hesitation, in that small, terrible, human hesitation, the moment bifurcates. Goes 2 ways simultaneously, because the crowd, seeing the hesitation, takes it as something, takes it as permission or as victory, or as the final confirmation that the rules of normal commerce have suspended themselves for this particular morning. 3 more people reach past stall barriers. 4, 10. You watch it happen. You're close enough to reach past a barrier yourself. You don't. Not because you're not hungry, because you are. Not because you don't think the price is wrong, because you do. But because you are 17 and alone and in a city where you know nobody powerful, and where the only thing between you and the street is Madame Lefebvre's garni and the yoke across your shoulders, and you cannot afford the Châtelet. You cannot afford to disappear. You back away from the crowd. It is not easy. There are people pressing in from behind you, drawn by the noise, by the gravity that a large crowd in motion acquires. You angle your buckets. They're useful here. The empty buckets take up space, create a little buffer, and you work your way to the edge. The police arrive before you've cleared the last of the crowd. Not many of them. 4 men in the grey uniform of the watch, with wooden batons, looking at the situation with the expression of men who are told to keep order and have arrived at a moment when order and keeping might be in conflict. They stop at the edge of the crowd. The crowd stops moving. Everybody looks at everybody. Then somebody throws a turnip. You have cleared the immediate area by the time you hear the sounds change. You're on the Rue Tirchap, moving fast, your empty buckets clanging against each other in a way that announces your presence very clearly, but which you cannot currently stop. Behind you, the noise of Les Halles is doing something complicated. There is shouting that might be angry or might be authoritative or might be both at once. There is the sound of something wooden being broken, though you can't tell what. You don't look back. You walk fast and then faster away from it. By the time you reach the Fontaine des Innocents, your breathing has settled. The fountain is quiet. A few women filling their own buckets. A water carrier you don't know on the other side of the basin. The nymphs of Jean Goujon look down at everyone with their carved stone expressions of eternal mild interest. You fill your buckets. Your hands are shaking slightly. Not from cold, though the cold is still there. From the particular adrenaline of watching something that might have become very serious and then leaving before it did. Or maybe from watching the woman on the stall and feeling for a moment entirely on her side, and then leaving anyway. That feeling sits in you as you take the weight of the yoke. Not guilt exactly, not shame, something quieter than either. The recognition that poverty contains more choices than it looks like from the outside, but that the choices it contains are mostly between bad and worse, and that the people making them are doing their best with what they have, and that some of them are braver than you, and that this is a fact about them, not a judgment about you, but that you will be thinking about it for a while. You pick up your buckets, you go. Sunday. The shop is closed. The garni is as close to quiet as it gets. Gilles' cough has migrated to a lower register today, which Marguerite says is either an improvement or the phase before worse, and she says it with the tone of someone who's been watching long enough to know both outcomes are possible. You go out. Not to church, though you pass a church. You pass several. Paris is dense with churches. Almost every street has one within view, and on Sunday mornings the bells of these churches perform a staggered overlapping concert that begins before 6 and doesn't fully subside until 9. The sound of the nearest ones so close and so large that you feel them in your sternum. You walk north, then northwest, past the Latin Quarter and across the river and into the city's other side. The right bank is different, not better, not worse in a simple direction, more varied, more stratified. The Marais on one side, where the old aristocracy has lived for a century in hotels particuliers, private palaces really, with courtyards and gardens hidden behind high stone walls. The scale of individual wealth made visible in stone and ironwork. The Rue Saint-Denis running north with its guild halls and its commerce. The Temple neighbourhood with its tanners and its craftsmen. And then, as you go further north, as the city begins to loosen and the streets become less impossibly dense, the hill, the Butte Montmartre. It rises above the city like something the city forgot was there. Not dramatically, this is not the Alps. This is a hill, 30 or so metres above the surrounded plain, but distinctly, visibly, with a quality of separateness from the urban tangle below. There are windmills on top. This seems, when you first see them, like something out of a story. The great white shapes of windmill sails turning slowly against the winter sky, above the smoke and the rooftops of Paris. But they are working windmills, practical windmills, grinding grain for the city's bakers. The same grain the woman on the stall was speaking about. The same grain that went into the bread that cost 9 sous this week. Ground here, on a hill above the city, by the simple violence of the wind. You climb. The path up the butte is not formal. It's a track, worn smooth by feet, going up through vineyards. Montmartre has had vineyards since the Romans. They are ancient, half wild. The vines cut back to gnarled stumps for winter, and past a few farm buildings and a scatter of small houses that belong to people who live just outside the city, or just at its edge, in the uncertain territory between Paris and everywhere else. By the time you reach the top, your legs are burning in a different way than the stairs. Not the loaded stair climb, but the honest burn of uphill walking, which is its own kind of effort. You stand at the top, and there it is, Paris. From here, you can see all of it. Not all of it in the sense of every building, every street, but all of it in the sense of the shape of the whole, the extent of the city, the remarkable fact of how much of it there is. It spreads below you from the Seine to the city walls and beyond, the grey-brown expanse of rooftops and chimneys and the occasional dome rising above the general level. The dome of the Invalides, the dome of the Sorbonne, and to the east, the towers of Notre Dame above the Ile de la Cité, the same towers you stop to look at from the quays, visible from here in their proper relationship to everything else. Part of it, yes, but distinct, rising above the city the way things that have been around long enough sometimes manage to rise above what surrounds them. The Seine is silver today, or silver grey. The light is diffused through a thin cloud cover that turns everything softer, flattens the shadows, makes the river glow without glaring. The bridges cross it at intervals. You can count 5 from here, maybe 6. And the barges and boats on the river are tiny from this height, their movement visible as a subtle animation in the otherwise still image. The smoke from 300,000 chimneys rises and then bends, carried by the west wind, a brown haze that hangs over the eastern part of the city where the wind is carrying it. From below, that haze is something you breathe, something that sits in your chest at night when the air goes still. From here, it looks almost beautiful, amber in the thin winter light, suspended above the city like a veil. You sit down on the cold ground. You ate well this morning. Marguerite had extra bread, yesterday's market surplus, and she shared it without being asked, as she sometimes does, pragmatically, because bread goes hard quickly, and it's better to give it than lose it. You sat at the table with Marguerite and Gilles, and the bread and the thin soup that Madame Lefebvre sometimes provides on Sunday mornings as part of the implicit social contract of the garni, and it was quiet and warm enough from the hearth, and nobody was arguing, and Gilles' cough was in its lower register, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. You're thinking about the woman at the market. You've been thinking about her since Tuesday. Not continuously. You don't have the luxury of continuous thought. Work requires too much of your attention, and the work has continued regardless of what else is happening. But she returns to you. The way she held the loaf up, the 8 sous on the counter, the crowd's change of state when she did it. You don't know what happened after you left. You know what the neighbourhood says happened. Some stalls were raided, some grain taken at the old price, some at no price at all. The police made 3 arrests. The watch retreated when the crowd became too large to manage. By mid-afternoon, things had settled. The normal operating state of exhausted anger that Paris maintains continuously, having re-established itself over the acute event of the morning. Nobody major was hurt. No buildings burned. This outcome is considered, on the Rue Mouffetard, something between a partial victory and a lucky escape, depending on who you ask. From the Butte Montmartre, looking down at the city that contains all of this, you try to hold the complexity of it in your head at once. 600,000 people. Each one of them has a morning same as yours. Each one of them has a bed somewhere, a room, a specific set of cold feet and hungry mornings, and the daily negotiation between what they need and what they have. The aristocrat in his Marais hotel has a morning too, a different one. A morning of warmth and adequate breakfast and the security of knowing the floor won't give way beneath him. But a morning, a waking up, a body that has requirements that the world must in some way meet. And between that morning and yours, everything. The entire architecture of hierarchy and luck and birth and circumstance that determines which morning you have. You did not choose to be from nowhere south of Auxerre. The grain merchant's agent did not choose to have connections in the right places. And somewhere in the middle of all this, on the butte above the city, there is something, not justice exactly, not a plan, but something that feels like the permanent reality of the situation, that cities need carrying, that Paris is carried constantly by people who are invisible to it, that the water in the upper floors arrived there because someone carried it up, that someone was you. That is not a small thing. It is a small thing that Paris will not acknowledge, and it is a small thing that cannot be stopped, and it is a small thing that will be repeated tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, and the knowledge of it, the fact of it, is something you own, regardless of whether anyone else acknowledges it. You sit on the cold hill for a while. The windmill sails turn above you. The smoke of Paris blows east. The towers of Notre Dame stand in the middle of everything and have stood there for 5 centuries and will stand there longer than anyone looking at them can imagine. The cold rises through the ground. You should go back. You stay a little longer. Spring arrives in the Rue Mouffetard sideways, cautiously, in the way that spring arrives in places that have given up expecting it, not with a flourish, but with small signs that you notice and then doubt and then notice again. The light changes first. You start to see it. Late afternoon, early April, a different quality to the light that comes in through the single window for its 40 minutes, warmer, reaching further into the room. The smell of the street changes. The heavy sealed winter smell of wet cobblestones and frozen waste opens slightly, as though Paris has let out a breath it has been holding since November. The first vendor with fresh greens appears on the Mouffetard. Not good greens, not yet, but greens. Actual greens. And this seems to matter to people in a way that is partly practical and partly something else. Gilles gets worse. This happens at roughly the same pace that the spring arrives, which means you spend April watching both things simultaneously. The light getting better and the cough getting worse. The air warming and the breathing behind it labouring. Marguerite knows before anyone else that the direction has become fixed. She starts giving him a better share of the bread without comment. You do the same when you have enough. He doesn't thank you for it. He's from Lyon and has a particular view on the relationship between people that doesn't include the kind of explicit gratitude that a boy from a village south of Auxerre was taught to expect. But he tells you, once, between coughs, in the voice he uses when he has to use more breath than he wants to, "The city eats you from the inside, boy. That's what it does." He is coughing blood by the end of April. The apothecary's draft, which costs a sou every 3 days and is made of something the apothecary describes as strengthening, is not doing what the apothecary described. The apothecary has moved from strengthening to stabilizing, to a particular quality of professional silence that everyone in the garni recognizes. You continue to pay for the draft anyway. Marguerite pays half. The Breton brothers, who turn out to have more feeling than their habitual arguing suggested, pay the other half. Gilles does not ask you to. He is dead in early May. The church of Saint-Médard at the bottom of the Rue Mouffetard provides burial for the poor of the neighbourhood. It is not a rich burial. There is no stone. There is a place in the ground in the part of the churchyard that is reserved for people who die without enough to pay for better. In a few years that place will be needed again, and the bones that are there will be moved to make room. This is Paris. Space is a luxury nobody at his level can afford. Not the living and not the dead. You stand at the burial on a grey Wednesday morning. Marguerite is there. The Breton brothers, who are unexpectedly formal in church settings, are there. The nameless man from the corner has been replaced by 2 new people by now, but one of them, a spinner from the Auvergne, comes anyway. The priest says the words. The words are quick, because there are other burials, because Saint-Médard buries the poor of the Mouffetard continuously, because the city's population and the city's conditions ensure that this particular ceremony is never lacking for subject matter. Afterwards, Marguerite says, he was here 11 years before me, 22 years on this street. You think about 22 years on the Rue Mouffetard. How long have you been here? You ask. You know the answer, but you ask. 13 years, she says, a pause. Don't make it 22, she says, not unkindly. The way she says everything, practical, clear, without ornament. You don't know what she means. You don't know if it's advice or prophecy or simply an observation about the shape of a certain kind of life. You walk back up the Mouffetard in the May morning. The market is running. The turnip vendor has been replaced by pea sellers and asparagus, and something green and leafy that smells of spring mud and growth. The baker's window shows white bread today because the grain situation has stabilized. This week, at least. This month. And the price is back to 8 sous, and the bread is whiter than it was in February. You buy a loaf, 8 sous. The bread is good today. You eat it on the walk and think about Gilles and the cough and the 22 years and Marguerite's "Don't make it 22." And you eat the last piece standing in front of Madame Lefebvre's building, looking up at the 4th floor, where your room is, where the window faces a wall, where in a few months there will be a new person on Gilles' side of the mattress. Someone else just arrived. Someone else who came to Paris with nothing but hope. Summer arrives, and with it the Seine goes low, and the smell of the river gets serious. The cesspits, which are below the buildings everywhere in Paris, are less sealed in summer heat, and the gas that accumulates in them, hydrogen sulfide, though you don't know this word, you know it as the smell that sometimes rises through the floorboards at night, a rotting egg quality that has a physical weight to it. The gas is more present in summer, drifting up through the city's underground layers into the streets and the rooms above. The dead buried in the innocents, packed into their overloaded ground, make themselves known in summer. The priests of the parishes around the cemetery have been complaining about it for years, decades. There are reports of putrefied air seeping into the basements of adjacent buildings. Reports of people becoming ill. Reports of produce stored near the cemetery walls spoiling faster than it should. The city nods and does nothing, because the innocence has always been there, and the dead have always been buried somewhere, and the city is very large and very complicated, and very slow to change things that have been the way they are for 300 years. You work through the summer. The heat makes the carrying harder. You sweat through your shirt. You drink more water than usual from a small cask you start bringing with you. The stairs are airless and close and smell of the accumulated summer of the building. But the work doesn't stop because the need for water doesn't stop. If anything, summer increases demand. People need more water to wash, more water to drink, more water for the small gardens that some residents keep on windowsills and in the tiny courtyards. Your income goes up slightly. Not enough to change anything fundamental, but enough to buy thread without thinking about it, which has become a small private measure of stability. Thread, no longer theoretical. The new roommate is named Bernard, from the Auvergne, 20 years old, who works as a porter at Les Halles and sleeps with the solid unconsciousness of a man who's been physically exhausted every day of his adult life. He is a good roommate. He takes up less emotional space than Gilles, though in different ways, and the room in the absence of the cough is quieter at night, which is both better and slightly strange. Autumn comes. The harvest reports come in. This year's harvest is average, which is the best news possible, which tells you something about what recent years have been. The bread price stays at 8 sous. The grain situation is calm. The Rue Mouffetard's particular anxiety about the price of bread drops from acute to chronic, which is the mode it prefers to operate in anyway. You have been in Paris for a year now. You're 17 and a half, or 18, or somewhere in there. Your birthday is in October, and you're not entirely sure which October it has now become, because in Paris time moves differently than it did in the village. In the village a year was a thing with clear edges, spring and harvest and winter giving it shape, and here a year is just an accumulation of trips to the fountain, of loads on the yoke, of coins counted out on cold mornings. You're not the person who arrived. You know this in specific ways. You know the Mouffetard the way you knew the 3 fields outside your village, by heart, by the specific geography of your daily movement through it. You know the fountain schedules, the queuing patterns, the best times to go to which fountain depending on the day of the week. You know which stairs in which buildings are unstable and which are solid. You know which customers will make you wait and which ones have your coins ready. You know the city's moods, the way certain days feel different from others, certain days when the streets have the coiled spring quality that the market riot had, and other days when Paris is just going about its business with the grinding, perpetual industry of a place that has to feed itself every single morning. Your shoulders are different. You can feel this when you move. The muscles have developed into something specific, dense and asymmetric in the way Veronique's are, shaped by the exact repetition of the same load in the same place. You are made by this work in a way that you will carry with you, physically, in your body, long after the work itself might change. Your hands have become the hands you looked at in surprise in those first months. You are, in some way you are still figuring out how to articulate, more Paris than Auxerre now. On an evening in October, the first genuinely cold evening, the first evening when the idea of winter is not abstract but specific, when the hearth fire is lit for real instead of symbolically, you sit in the back room of Madame Lefebvre's garni with Marguerite and Bernard, and a bottle of cheap wine that Bernard bought because it was Thursday, and Thursday seemed like a reason. The wine is not good. This should not be taken to mean anything positive about the wine. It is cheap wine from somewhere in the south, acidic and slightly cloudy, and you drink it from the tin cups that the room's full complement of vessels. Marguerite has a story she tells when she drinks, about coming to Paris from a village in Burgundy, a village somewhat like yours, and finding the city in a state she describes as exactly what I expected and nothing like I expected at the same time. You ask her what that means. I expected it to be hard, she says. It is hard. That was not a surprise. She turns her cup. I didn't expect it to be interesting, constantly, even when it's terrible. Bernard, who is from the Auvergne and has a philosophical mode that emerges with wine, says, it's a machine. The city is a machine. You're a part of it. Once you understand that, you know where you are. Where are you, you ask? He thinks about it. Near the bottom, he says, but inside the machine, moving. Not outside and not moving. That's worse. Marguerite nods at this, which is the highest endorsement she gives anything. You drink the wine and think about being inside the machine. You think about the grain merchant's agent on the river, buying the harvest before it reaches market. You think about Monsieur Aubert in his room on the Rue des Bernardins, copying legal documents and talking about the Parlement. You think about Monsieur Delacour, the schoolmaster from Dijon, and his one denier. You think about the woman on the stall at Les Halles, holding a loaf of bread with 8 sous on the counter, and the crowd that went quiet and then moved. You think about Gilles, who was in the machine for 22 years and left it in the churchyard of Saint-Médard. You think about Madame Couturier on the 4th floor of the Rue du Pot de Fer, breaking bread in half and giving you the smaller half and saying, "The fountain was busy this morning," in the tone of someone who has learned to make conversation serve the purpose of company. All of these people are in the machine. All of them, from the grain merchant's agent to Gilles' body in the church ground, are moving parts of the same apparatus that produces daily the thing called Paris. The thing that tourists come to see, the thing the philosophers write about, the thing the king administers from Versailles, or tries to, or imagines he does, the thing that you have been living inside for a year, water by water, stair by stair, coin by coin, November. The cold is back in full authority, and the Rue Mouffetard has gone back to its winter mode. The market more subdued, the people moving faster, the quality of the air sharpened by cold into something cleaner tasting, if not actually cleaner. You have 16 regular customers now, 4 more than you started with. 2 of them came from referrals. Madame Couturier told her neighbour Madame Duplessis that you were reliable and quick on the stairs, and Madame Duplessis told her sister, and her sister is on the 3rd floor of a building on the Rue de la Clé that is a reasonable detour on your normal route. Referrals. You didn't know to think about this. You know now. Your income is still small. It is less small than it was. The difference is small, but you're eating bread every day without doing arithmetic first. This seems worth noting. The yoke is still holding. You've wrapped the crack in a length of leather cord now, bound tight, which is better than the tallow, more stable in both heat and cold. The crack hasn't opened in 4 months. The yoke feels different with the cord, slightly thicker in the grip, slightly altered in how the weight transfers, and you've adapted to it the way you adapted to everything, through repetition, through the body's practical intelligence. On the long evening of a November Saturday, the market closed, the city in its weekend mode, Madame Lefebvre's building settling with the sounds of old wood in cold air. You lie on your back on the mattress and look at the ceiling. The ceiling has a crack running from the northeast corner toward the centre. You've watched it for a year. It has not lengthened, but it has done something else, something more subtle. It has darkened. The plaster around it becoming stained from whatever moisture is in the room above, and the darkness spreads from the crack outward in a pattern like a river delta, branching and branching. You know this ceiling. You know it the way you know the stairs, the way you know the streets. You know it by heart. Bernard's asleep. His breathing is slow and even, the breathing of a very tired body doing its essential maintenance. The room smells of the day, of the work, of bread, of the cold that came in on everyone's coats and didn't fully leave. Outside, a church bell rings the hour. Then a distant bell. The echo of the first rings it again, slightly later, the sound arriving from further away. Then another, barely audible, from somewhere across the city. Paris counting its hours. You're tired in the way you're always tired at the end of a work day, but tonight there's something else underneath it. Not the physical tiredness, which is comfortable, almost pleasant now, a tiredness that knows it has earned its rest, but a different tiredness, more recent, the tiredness of having held the weight of a year, of having counted the costs of things, of having been 17 and alone in the largest city in the world and gotten through it, not gracefully, not without loss, not without the sou that the schoolmaster kept, or the body in Saint-Médard's churchyard, or the woman on the stall whose name you never learned, or the boy with bare feet at the brazier who was sent away into the February cold. Through it, though, you are through it. Your hands are warm tonight. This happens sometimes in winter, when the day has been physically hard enough that the body doesn't waste heat on extremities during the night, but keeps it at the centre instead. Usually your hands are cold in November. Tonight they're warm, and you notice this the way you notice all the small mercies, briefly, precisely, with the attention of someone who has learned that small mercies deserve attention. Outside, Paris, continuing without you, as Paris always does. The night soil carts beginning their rounds. The early bakers stoking their ovens for tomorrow's bread. The water of the Seine moving through its bridges cold and strong and indifferent. The dead in the innocents doing what they do. The windmills on Montmartre standing still for once. No wind tonight. Just the dark hill and the city below it, and the smoke from 100,000 hearths rising straight up into the still air. Somewhere in the Latin Quarter, a student is reading by a candle, and the candle is burning down, and the student doesn't notice yet. Somewhere near the Marais, someone with money is having a dinner party, and the food is good, and the conversation is about ideas, about Voltaire and Montesquieu, and the nature of society, about what kind of city Paris should be, about what men owe each other. Those ideas are real. They will do things. Eventually, those ideas. They will move from the dinner tables to the pamphlets to the streets, and what they do in the streets will be large and loud and terrible, and will change France in ways that would seem impossible to anyone watching the Rue Mouffetard in this particular November of this particular year. But that is later. That is not tonight. Tonight is simple. Tonight is a year done, a bed earned, a body tired in the specific productive way of bodies that have worked. Sleep comes for you slowly. It always does when you're actually lying still and warm. The city stays loud. The building stays present with its creaks and its settling, and your mind, released from the day's demands, wanders back through what it collected. The crack in the ceiling, the fountain queue at 6, the weight of the yoke settling across your shoulders, the bread from the baker, warm through your coat, the woman holding the loaf up, the 8 sous on the counter, Madame Couturier breaking the bread in half, the Butte Montmartre and the smoke of Paris bending east in the February wind, Notre Dame rising above the quays, the towers cut off mid-air where the spires never came, Gilles' cough, lower now, lower, receding, gone. The city counts its hours, 1 bell, then 2. You've been in Paris for a year. You will be here tomorrow, and the day after. You will wake before the light, and your hands will be cold again, and the yoke will be there in its corner, and the crack in the yoke will still be holding, and somewhere on the Rue de Fossé Saint-Marcel a schoolmaster from Dijon will be sleeping soundly in a room that you supply with water, and in the morning he will hold a bucket up to his window and look at the light through it and find it wanting, and you will say, "Yes, monsieur," and you will take whatever coins he gives you, and you will go back down the stairs, and you will go back to the fountain, and you will fill the buckets again and again, and the city will be there, loud and cold and brutal and full of people trying to survive it, some of them doing better than you and some of them doing worse, all of them part of the same grinding machine that produces every single day the fact of Paris. You are inside it, You are part of it. This is enough. The candle by the door burns down to its stub. The light flickers once, twice, fighting small and animal-like against its own ending, and then it doesn't. Darkness. The good darkness, finally. Not the pressing urban dark of 5 in the morning, but the soft dark of a room that has given itself over to rest, where the cold is outside the blanket and the warmth is inside, and the city's noise has receded to a background that no longer requires attention. Your breathing slows, the weight of the yoke is gone, your shoulders are still, your hands, warm tonight, warm in November, open and still. Somewhere far away a bell rings. You count it without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 in the morning. 4 hours until the fountains begin to fill. 4 hours. Let them be. Let the fountains wait. Let the Rue Mouffetard wait. Let the stairs and the buckets and the customers wait. Let Madame Couturier's 4th floor wait. Let even the bread wait, that good heavy bread, half a loaf saved for morning. Let everything wait except this, the room, the dark, the steady breathing of someone sleeping beside you, the sounds of a city that has been here for more than 15 centuries and will be here long after every name on every street has been changed and changed again. They will drain the cemetery of the innocents eventually. They will rebuild the Pont Notre Dame. They will fill in the open gutters and lay clean water pipes through the streets, and the water carriers will no longer be needed, and the profession of Etienne Poirier will pass out of the world, unremarked, replaced by something mechanical and efficient and utterly unable to break a loaf of bread in half on a cold morning and hand you the smaller piece. The towers of Notre Dame will still be there, the Seine will still be moving, Paris will still be Paris. And somewhere in the long memory of this city, in the sediment of its streets and the weight of its stones, the fact that someone carried the water up will persist, not as a name, not as a monument, just as the trace of a habit, the groove worn in the stone staircase, the shape of the work in the shape of the building. Some things don't disappear. The human need for rest at the end of a long day doesn't disappear. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it takes the exhausted city, gradually, deeply, without drama. Let the cold be outside. Let the warmth stay. Let your breathing slow and slow and slow until it matches the slow breathing of a building settling into night, of a city holding its 600,000 sleeping souls, of a river that has been moving through stone since before the first person crossed it and will be moving long after the last. You have earned this. Take it. Sleep now. Good night.